In the brutal, beautiful world of professional ice hockey, legends are forged in different ways. Some are carved from breathtaking skill, the Gretzkys and Lemieux, who seem to play a different game entirely. Others are hammered out of sheer toughness, the enforcers and warriors whose names are synonymous with grit and intimidation. And then, there are the quiet legends, the ones whose greatness isn't measured in goals or penalty minutes, but in lifetimes of devotion, in generations of players they guided, and in the universal respect they commanded in a sport that doesn't grant it easily. What if I told you that one of hockey's most influential figures was a man who, as a player, never scored 20 goals in a season? A man whose most famous coaching achievement happened in a rebel league that the establishment tried to crush. This is the story of a man who won 2 Stanley Cups playing alongside the immortal Gordie Howe, and then, years later, found himself coaching that same living legend, while Howe was playing on a line with his own 2 sons. It's the story of a patriarch, the head of a hockey dynasty that has touched the game for over 70 years. But more than that, it's the story of a man known in the roughest sport on earth as its last gentleman. This is the quiet, powerful, and deeply human story of Bill Dineen. To understand a man like Bill Dineen, you have to understand the world that created him. He was born in 1932 in Arvida, Quebec, a town that was, in itself, a unique Canadian experiment. Arvida wasn't an ancient settlement that grew over centuries. It was a planned community, a company town meticulously designed and built in the 1920s by the Aluminum Company of America. Life there was orderly, hard-working, and deeply communal. The rhythms of the town were dictated by the shifts at the plant, and the social fabric was woven from the families who lived and worked side by side. But the defining feature of life in Arvida, like so many Canadian towns of that era, was the winter. The cold was a constant, powerful presence. It froze the rivers, blanketed the streets, and drove people indoors. But for the children, it was a gift. The cold turned every puddle, pond, and flooded field into a sheet of glass, a natural hockey rink. This was the Canada of the original 6 NHL, a time when the sport was less of a business and more of a national religion. Kids didn't dream of being multi-millionaire athletes. They dreamed of pulling on the sweater of the Montreal Canadiens or the Toronto Maple Leafs. They learned the game on hand-me-down skates with catalogs stuffed into their socks as shin pads. Hockey wasn't an extracurricular activity. It was the language of winter, the currency of childhood friendships, and the most tangible dream a working-class boy could have. It was in this environment that Bill Dineen's life was shaped. He wasn't just born in Canada, he was born into the very soul of hockey. The game was in the air he breathed and the ice beneath his feet. It taught him the values that would define his entire life, the importance of teamwork learned in the shadow of the aluminum plant, the resilience required to play on a frozen pond in sub-zero temperatures, and the humility of being one part of a greater whole. He was never the flashiest player, but from his earliest days, he understood the game on a deeper level. He understood that success wasn't just about individual brilliance, but about character, effort, and a profound respect for the game itself. These weren't just lessons for the rink. They were lessons for life, forged in the cold, clear air of 1930s Quebec. Bill Dineen's journey from the frozen ponds of Arvida to the bright lights of the National Hockey League was a testament to quiet persistence. He was a gifted player, a hard-nosed winger with a knack for being in the right place at the right time. His path led him to one of the most prestigious junior hockey programs in the country, the Toronto St. Michael's Majors. This was a legendary hockey factory, a place that produced future Hall of Famers like Red Kelly, Dick Duff, and Frank Mahovlich. Playing for St. Mike's was a sign that you were on the path to the pros, and Dineen thrived in that elite environment. His talent was undeniable, and in 1953, he achieved the dream of every Canadian boy. He signed a contract with an NHL team, the Detroit Red Wings. And this wasn't just any team. The Red Wings of the 1950s were a dynasty, the most dominant force in hockey. Their roster was a collection of gods. There was the ferocious Ted Lindsay on the wing, the brilliant Red Kelly on defense, the unbeatable Terry Sawchuk in goal, and towering over them all was the man known simply as Mr. Hockey, the legendary Gordie Howe. For a rookie like Bill Dineen, stepping into that locker room was like stepping into a cathedral. He was now sharing the ice with his idols. He quickly learned his place. He wasn't going to be the superstar on this team, not with Howe and Lindsay leading the charge. He was going to be a role player, a grinder, a checking forward, a guy who killed penalties and did the dirty work in the corners, and he embraced it. He played 71 games in his rookie season of 1953 to 54, contributing to a team that would go on to win the Stanley Cup. The following year, he did it again. In his first 2 seasons in the NHL, Bill Dineen was a 2-time Stanley Cup champion. He had reached the absolute pinnacle of the sport. He would play parts of 5 seasons with Detroit before being traded to the Chicago Blackhawks. In total, he played 282 games in the NHL. It was a solid, respectable career. But as the 1950s turned into the 1960s, Dineen found himself spending more and more time in the American Hockey League, the top minor league affiliate. For many players, this would have been a bitter pill to swallow, a sign that their best days were behind them. For Bill Dineen, it was the beginning of the second, and arguably most important, act of his life. In the minors, playing for teams like the Buffalo Bisons and the Seattle Totems, he wasn't just a player anymore. He became a veteran leader, a mentor to the younger guys trying to make their way up. It was here that he discovered his true calling, teaching the game. He transitioned into the role of a player coach, still lacing up the skates, but also drawing up plays, managing personalities, and shaping the culture of a team. He was learning how to lead not just by example, but with wisdom and guidance. Then, in the early 1970s, the entire landscape of professional hockey was thrown into chaos. A new league, the World Hockey Association, or WHA, was formed to directly challenge the NHL's monopoly. The WHA was an audacious free-spending upstart, and they needed to make a splash to be taken seriously. They did it by pulling off the biggest coup in hockey history. They lured Gordie Howe out of retirement. Howe had retired from the Red Wings in 1971, his body worn down by decades of brutal play. But the WHA offered him something the NHL never would: the chance to play on a professional team with his 2 teenage sons, Mark and Marty. The team that signed them was the Houston Aeros, and they needed a coach. They needed someone who could handle the unprecedented media circus, manage the delicate family dynamic of a father playing with his sons, and, most importantly, someone who Gordie Howe himself would respect. They needed a man of character, a steady hand who understood the game and the legend. They chose Bill Dineen. It was a stroke of genius. Here was Dineen, the humble role player from the 50s, now tasked with coaching his former teammate, the greatest player of all time. Any potential for awkwardness was immediately erased by the deep, mutual respect the 2 men shared. Dineen wasn't intimidated by Howe, and Howe didn't try to undermine his coach. Dineen created an environment where Gordie could be both a father and a teammate, and where Mark and Marty could develop as players without being crushed by the weight of their father's shadow. The result was magic. The Houston Aeros, led by the Howe family and guided by Bill Dineen, became the class of the WHA. They were a brilliant mix of veteran savvy and youthful exuberance. They won the Avco Cup, the WHA's championship trophy, in their very first season together in 1974. And to prove it was no fluke, they did it again in 1975, winning back-to-back titles. Bill Dineen was named the WHA's Coach of the Year. He had taken on one of the most unique and pressure-filled coaching jobs in sports history, and had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. His reputation as one of hockey's brightest coaching minds was sealed. When the WHA eventually folded and merged with the NHL, Dineen's success did not go unnoticed. He took a job coaching the Adirondack Red Wings, Detroit's AHL farm team, and in 1986, he led them to a Calder Cup championship. His success at every level, player, WHA coach, AHL coach, finally led him back to the biggest stage of all. In 1991, at the age of 59, Bill Dineen was named the head coach of the NHL's Philadelphia Flyers, completing a journey that had taken him from the minors to the pinnacle of his profession. The hockey lifer was back in the big show. To truly understand Bill Dineen's impact, you have to look beyond the box scores and the championship trophies. His real legacy is found in the stories told by the men who played for him, and in the family he built. He was a coach, but he was a father first, not just to his own children, but to the hundreds of young men who passed through his locker rooms. His own family was a testament to his values. He and his wife Pat were a team. She was the anchor, raising their 5 children, Gord, Ron, Kevin, Peter, and daughter Sean, often on her own while Bill was on the road. The Dineen household was steeped in hockey, but it was also filled with love and humility. Bill never pushed his sons into the sport. He simply made the rink a place of joy and learning, and they all fell in love with it on their own terms. 4 of his sons would go on to play professional hockey, with Kevin and Gord having long, successful careers in the NHL. Kevin, a fierce competitor much like his father, would become the captain of the Philadelphia Flyers, playing for his dad in one of those rare storybook moments that sports sometimes provides. Players from every era of his career tell similar stories about Dineen. They remember a man who was calm in a storm, who communicated with honesty and respect, not with rage. In a profession filled with fiery, screaming tyrants, Dineen's quiet authority stood out. He treated the star player and the fourth-line grinder with the same level of dignity. He understood that his players were young men, often far from home, dealing with immense pressure. He knew their families, asked about their lives outside the rink, and created a culture where players felt supported as human beings, not just as assets. One of the most telling anecdotes about his character comes from his time coaching in the minors. After winning the Calder Cup with Adirondack, the players are awarded championship rings. However, one of his veteran players, a career minor leaguer who had given his heart and soul to the team, was not eligible to receive one due to a technicality about the number of games he had played. Without a moment's hesitation, and without any fanfare, Bill Dineen took off his own Stanley Cup ring, the one he had won as a player with the dynastic Detroit Red Wings, a priceless piece of his own history, and gave it to the player. He told him, "You deserve this more than I do." The gesture spoke volumes. It was a selfless act of pure class, a demonstration that for Dineen, the team's collective achievement and the recognition of a player's hard work meant more than his own personal accolades. Even when he was coaching the high-flying Philadelphia Flyers in the 90s, with a superstar like Eric Lindros at the center of the universe, his approach never changed. Lindros was a phenomenal talent, a physical freak who could dominate games, but he was also a young, polarizing figure surrounded by controversy. Dineen acted as a stabilizing force. He refused to get caught up in the media drama. He coached the player, not the reputation, and for a time, he helped harness Lindros' immense talent, putting him on the Crazy Eights line with John LeClair and Michael Renberg, one of the most dominant forward lines of the decade. He treated Lindros with respect, and in return, he got the superstar's best hockey. Bill Dineen's gift was his humanity. In a business that can be cold and transactional, he never forgot that the game was played by people, and it was the people who mattered most. For a figure as universally beloved as Bill Dineen, the notion of controversy seems almost out of place. There were no scandals, no public feuds, no dark secrets. However, his career did exist at the intersection of some of hockey's most significant historical debates, and his story adds a fascinating layer of nuance to them. The first of these is the legacy of the World Hockey Association. For years, the NHL establishment and many old-school hockey writers treated the WHA as a second-rate, rebel league. They downplayed its achievements and argued that its quality of play was inferior. In this context, Dineen's back-to-back championships with the Houston Aeros could be, and sometimes were, viewed with a degree of skepticism. Was winning in the WHA truly equivalent to winning in the NHL? This historical debate misses the point of his achievement. The challenge for Dineen in Houston wasn't just about winning hockey games. It was about managing a cultural phenomenon. He was coaching the most famous player on the planet, who was playing with his 2 sons, under a media microscope unlike any other. It was an experiment that could have easily imploded into a mess of jealousy, ego, and family drama. Dineen's masterful handling of that delicate situation, and his ability to forge a championship team out of it, was a coaching triumph in any league, in any era. His success was a powerful argument for the WHA's legitimacy and a testament to his unparalleled people skills. The second area of complexity surrounds his tenure with the Philadelphia Flyers. In his first full season, 1992-93, the Flyers improved significantly, but missed the playoffs for a fourth straight year. Then, early in his second season, despite the team playing well, he was abruptly fired. On the surface, it made little sense. There was no player revolt. In fact, he was incredibly popular in the locker room. The controversy, as it were, was a classic front office power struggle. The Flyers' general manager at the time, Russ Farwell, was looking to remake the team in his own image, and the old-school, quietly dignified Dineen didn't fit the mold of the fiery, demanding coach he envisioned for the next phase. Dineen's firing wasn't about his inability to coach. It was about a philosophical clash. He was a gentleman from a different era, a man who believed in leading through respect and quiet strength. The corporate, high-pressure NHL of the 1990s was beginning to favor a different model. His dismissal can be seen as a poignant example of the changing nature of the game, where the old ways of doing things, no matter how effective or honorable, were sometimes pushed aside for a new, more aggressive vision. It was a complex and, for many, an unfair end to his NHL coaching career, but it did nothing to tarnish his reputation. If anything, it reinforced it. He handled the firing with the same class and dignity with which he had handled every victory and defeat in his life. He simply packed his bags, thanked the organization, and went looking for the next place where he could teach the game he loved. Bill Dineen represents an archetype that feels increasingly rare in modern professional sports: the hockey lifer. His career was a complete circle. He was a player coach, a head coach at the highest levels, and in his later years, he became a scout and a player development consultant. He never left the game, and the game never left him. He wasn't chasing money or fame. He was driven by a pure, unshakable passion for hockey. Even after he was done coaching in the NHL, he returned to Glens Falls, New York, a small hockey town where he had coached in the minors, and simply continued to teach. He became a fixture at the local rink, mentoring young players, offering advice, and just being around the game. He stands as a powerful symbol of a life dedicated to service, to giving back to the sport that gave him everything. He reminds us that the heart of the game isn't found in the boardrooms or the television studios, but in the cold rinks in the small towns where the next generation is learning to play. In the end, the story of Bill Dineen is a quiet epic. It's a story about more than just a game. It's about a way of life. He was a man who navigated the brutal high-stakes world of professional hockey for over 50 years. And yet, no one has a bad word to say about him. Think about how rare that is. In a world of intense rivalries, massive egos, and cutthroat competition, he was universally admired, respected, and loved. Bill Dineen passed away on December 10th, 2016, in Queensbury, New York, after a battle with cancer. He was 84 years old. News of his death sent a hush through the hockey world. Not only former teammates and players he had coached, but even fans who had never met him in person felt as though they had lost a part of their own history. Tributes poured in from every corner of the sport, from Hall of Fame legends, from those who had played for him in the WHA, AHL, and NHL, and from young coaches who had sought his guidance. The same words kept appearing: class, humility, integrity. In a sport as unforgiving as hockey, where rivalries and egos often leave their mark on a person's legacy, the fact that Bill Dineen left this world without a single bitter word spoken against him was almost unheard of. His legacy was not confined to the 2 Stanley Cups, the 2 Avco Cups, the 2 Calder Cups, or the hundreds of NHL games he played and coached. It lived in the way he made every person in the dressing room feel valued, from the brightest star to the quietest reserve. It lived in the simple but enduring principles he embodied: respect others, love your family, and play the game with your whole heart. Bill Dineen left this life the same way he lived it, quietly, without fanfare, yet leaving a void that time will struggle to fill. He was more than just a hockey lifer. He was proof that at any level, the greatest victory is the one in which you keep your dignity intact.